Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to today's webcast with TubeMogul. My name is Zina Pagan, ARF's marketing manager, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin learning about media planning, I will go over a few housekeeping items. For the best webcast experience, please keep yourself muted and your computer web camera turned off. The audio will be streamed. This means that you will be able to hear us throughout your computer speakers. However, if you prefer to use a teleconference option, I will post the information on the chat box. Should you have any questions during the session, please send these to me using the chat box and I will read them out at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded. If you would like to view the recorded event, it will be available on demand within 2 weeks from today. We are extending the conversation on social media. If you'd like to join us, please use hashtag ARF Webcast on Twitter. If you're interested in hosting a webcast of your own, please contact me at zina@thearf.org. And the ARF does have a few events coming up. The ARF's Leadership Lab is back for our summer session. And sorry about that. Our third class is tomorrow and will run through September 8th. The topic for this course will be centered around cross-platform measurement. Please check our website for further details on how to register. Also, if you're in the San Francisco area today, join us as we are with Quantcast. They host us to battle ad fraud and ad blocking. We will be joined by White Ops, the Marketing Science Consulting Group, Distillery, and Morgan Digital Ventures. If you're interested in either one of these ARFs or other ARF programs, please let me know and I would be happy to help you. And without further delay, I present to you Taylor Schreiner, Vice President of Research at TubeMogul. Taylor, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zina, for that introduction. Sorry, I hit the mute button on my microphone. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I've been on the other side of this conversation, especially when I was in New York. And I'm betting if you guys are anything like me, you're sitting in front of a box of lo mein in the middle of your lunch hour and and looking to learn a little bit of something in a relatively quick amount of time. So I'll try and be respectful of your time and talk to you briefly about what we have learned and what we are learning about the effects of algorithms on cross-screen planning and what it could mean for the future. It's a really exciting topic, and I'm excited to talk to you about it. First of all, though, a little introduction about who I am and who I work for. So first of all, TubeMogul is what we call ourselves software for branding. We're a company that some of you would think of us as a video DSP or at very least an advertising DSP. What we do is place advertising across the web and now across television, digital out of home, audio, all sorts of other things through software. And we work for advertisers and brands. So a brand or an advertiser or an agency comes to us looking for ways to efficiently place and analyze the effectiveness of their campaign. And we reach out to exchanges, open RTB opportunities to also programmatic private marketplaces or to programmatic direct relationships and place that advertising around the web and around television and digital out of home and audio, as I mentioned. So the thing to keep in mind with us, I think every time you listen to one of these things, you think, okay, so who's this guy, and why are they touching on this particular topic of research? The thing about us is we don't own any of that inventory. So the good news, I think, or the way I would think about why are we looking at cross-screen planning is we don't have a particular dog in this hunt per se, but we are extremely interested as our advertisers and marketers and agencies come to us looking for the right way to place media. We're extremely interested in figuring out what's the most efficient way to do that, especially in this increasingly cross-screen world. And before we go further on that, who am I? I'm Taylor Schreiner. I run research here at TubeMogul. I've been in this industry for about a decade more, starting with Yahoo, who we all mourn today, and going through LinkedIn and Twitter. And I've been at TubeMogul now for going on 2 years. As you're chowing down on your lo mein, I want to let you know what we're about to do so you guys know exactly what you're going to get out of this. The goal that I have today is to help all of you understand what we've learned about how algorithms can improve planning efficiency in this increasingly cross-screen world. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means conceptually, and we'll also talk a little bit about what that means in terms of data. Fair warning, some of the data is pretty big and impressive. So if you are eating that lo mein, if you just angle your lo mein away from your computer in case you have to do, a spit take with some of these outcomes, they're kind of fascinating. So we'll go through why do we need algorithms for planning? Like, how did we get here? We'll talk a little bit about what I mean by algorithmic cross-screen planning, and we'll talk about how much better this or what algorithmic planning can do for what algorithms can do for cross-screen planning, and then we'll talk about the fact that there's a lot more research to do in this area. And I think honestly, that's the thing that I want to make sure everybody leaves this presentation with right now and today, is that when you come out of this, you should be thinking, gosh, in this increasingly cross-screen world, we need to think about how algorithms can help us optimize our planning. This piece of research that TubeMogul has presented is a really interesting and powerful first foray into this space, but you'll see by the time we get to the end, there's a lot more work to do, and I'm excited to talk to the ARF about this because I think this is probably an industry-wide area of discussion and not just something that we at TubeMogul will understand end to end. It's going to be something that we as an industry are going to have to figure out. So let's start at the beginning. People are going to come into this webcast from all sorts of different backgrounds. I'm going to assume you're researchers, you're in the media space, but it's worth wrapping our heads around how did we get to a place where we really have to think about planning media across a variety of screens and channels. And it was fairly simple back in the day to think about print and print runs and their overlap with a fairly static or at least infrequently updated understanding of the overlap between the New York Times and the Washington Post and Time Magazine. And TV had some clear reach information, but it was a fairly limited number of channels. As recently as, when I was growing up watching television, not all that long ago, 30 years or so. And then things started to accelerate, both with cable and the accelerating number of channels, and that's something we've digested with online services, with satellite, with the real advent of the internet, and then with a huge amount of change that has happened, as you can see, in the past 15 years, from video on demand to Facebook taking over a huge portion of the advertising space, to Twitter, to game consoles that are streaming television, to Roku boxes that give you really interesting and obscure channels like 80s music videos, Hulu and Netflix on huge numbers of your devices, YouTube, now Instagram sharing video, and not on here is Snapchat, who's a partner of ours, and it's something where I'm old enough now where I'm having to sort of come up to speed on Snapchat. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, I was in Kansas City, watching kids of all ages wander around the city with their phones playing Pokemon Go, which is another potential media consumption channel. So we've seen screens proliferate to a great extent. We've also seen them accelerate in their proliferation. And I don't know about you, but I have no reason to think that this is all going to slow down and that for some reason we've reached all the ways in which somebody might actually want to consume video or consume media. And what makes it, at least as challenging is that, it's not like one of these things is coming through and out and displacing the others. People are moving seamlessly from outlet to outlet. So, and I think each one of us can think of how this works in our own lives, and each one of us can even think about how it works in the lives of other people who are at different life stages or in different places in their lives. But it's really easy these days to watch something on TV and move it to your tablet, and then while you're making breakfast, and then watch part of it on your phone as you commute, and then make it to work and finish it up on your desktop. That's all actually fairly seamless, and in fact, that describes very clearly something I did about 2 weeks ago, My son, I let my son watch Star Wars for the first time, and I was watching it all the way through to make sure he was, going to be good with it. And that's literally what I did. I started on the television, I moved it to the tablet, I watched it through on the commute, and I got to work, and I got back to the destruction of the Death Star on my work computer just before I started work. So it's not a theoretical thing. It's something that happens, I know, for all of us all the time. And sort of a corollary to that, as we set this all up, is that, even you can't even pick a dominant one of these things, right? You can't even say, look, it's always going to be television that is the dominant form or the form on the rise. Laptops and PC video consumption or media consumption, rose over several years, and now relative to other outlets are flat to declining, whereas the smartphone is on a rapid rise, and the tablet has sort of plateaued. And this is just sort of 5 of the major outlets. There's so many more, and we wouldn't expect this to remain static for any reason. So nobody can really feel safe and confident in one particular means of advertising or reaching out on one channel. In fact, you've got to think about how to reach people across multiple channels in the places where they want to be reached. And just to make things worse, and this is a lot of numbers, but y'all are researchers, I think you can handle it. This isn't even consistent from one group of people to the next. If you look at this, for instance, you can see that across multimedia devices, that's a peak usage for 25 to 34-year-olds. But if you look at something like internet via the laptop, that's really more of a 35 to 49-year-old thing. Not only is it the case that people are working across multiple devices, different audiences have really different profiles in terms of the devices and channels that they use. And this is just a basic age profile. As advertisers, I'm sure all of you know, advertisers are increasingly specific and increasingly data-driven in the way that they define audiences. And every one of those audiences is going to have a different profile in terms of the way that they need to be reached. So that leads us to really the question of the day. We're in an environment where people are consuming across a huge number of screens. They are consuming at changing rates across those screens, and different audiences are consuming across different sets of those screens. And anybody who's in the media business is faced with the challenge that they need to plan a media plan that addresses a given audience in an efficient way. So there certainly are, straightforward ways that you can do this. You can buy everything that has a reasonable concentration of your particular audience, but you're going to have a huge amount of overlap. And as screens proliferate, that overlap is just going to increase. You have to find a way to, and at the same time, if you buy, only those things with high concentration of your, let's say, males 18 to 34, that you're going to be missing a few people who have different media consumption habits, who don't fall into those core, spike TV opportunities. And by repeatedly buying the high concentration placements and high concentration programs and sites, you're going to miss those people with different behaviors who you still want to reach. So this is the conundrum, and this is what leads us to this question of cross-screen planning. So, to set up the problem a little bit further, just so that we're clear about what's going on, I pulled up an example of, one of the challenges. There are really 2 challenges, but one of the challenges of planning in a particular silo or against a particular channel, and this is basically what I was just talking about, where you say, look, if I want to buy, again, let's just stick with millennial males. In TV, I'm going to want to buy a lot of programs where they have high concentrations of millennial males. And in order to get incremental reach and to find more and more of them, I'm necessarily going to find some people I've already reached. And what's going to mean is that people who spend the most time on television, that is to say the most time watching television, are going to get the highest frequency from me. because I will have been on every one of their, if you've got a roommate somebody who watches, a lot of television, they're going to watch all 5 shows that you're running on, but you're running on each one of those 5 shows just to get the one guy who actually only watches that one show. So the guy who sits on the couch and watches all 5 of the shows you're running on is going to get high frequency, whereas, the people that you want, the incremental people that you want to reach who are low television consumers, say in the bottom 40 or 20% of TV consumption, they're going to get fairly low frequency, and in fact, you're going to miss a lot of those people because you can't be on every program that they want to reach you on, that you want to reach them on. So the way that planning across screens, one of the ways that planning across screens can really help you with this is to offer a bunch of different opportunities across different channels. So you can say, look, I'm going to be on television, because obviously television, pretty much for any audience that I've ever seen, is a huge portion of the way that you want to think about reaching people. But I have other channels as well where I can look for incremental reach that doesn't overlap with the people that I've already reached. And by offering those, by offering those other channels and looking for the incremental reach, you can kind of smooth your frequency curve so that you're not over frequenting the heavy TV consumers, and you're also not missing out on some of these light consumers who are going to be generally hard to find. So that's one of the problems of what I would call siloed planning, which is sort of the traditional way to do it, which is to say, look, I'm going to give a budget to TV, go find me my millennial males, and I'm going to give a different budget to digital, and maybe I'll give a different budget to social. When you do that, you get these suboptimal reach curves because you're not distributing your programming across that any particular channel efficiently. The problem is, even if you get really efficient in terms of looking for incremental reach in any given channel, it's very likely that, when you come back, the television people say, look, I've got this really great frequency smoothed plan where I am, I'm minimizing my over frequenting of heavy TV consumers, and I'm maximizing my reach. And if the digital guys did the same thing, they might actually, between digital and TV, be reaching the same people. So you have not only a problem of within channel trying to find the best way to get incremental reach with your dollars, but also if you're not thinking across channels, you're very likely finding the same people over and over again without even knowing it. So this is what's led us to think about how to use an algorithm to plan across these screens, because frankly, if you think about the thousands of sites that are out there, the thousands of apps that are on mobile phones, the literally thousands of programming options that you have on television now, nobody can sit down with a spreadsheet and say, look, I'm going to, I will figure out what the really optimal plan is here to reach as many incremental people as I can, just going around in Excel. It turns out you need something that can iterate thousands and thousands and thousands of times to really build an optimal plan. So those of you who come from a computer science background, I'll take you through this, but basically what we've done is developed a greedy algorithm that finds the most efficient next chunk of incremental reach. And I'll talk through what that means. This was built for as a product, but it turned out to be a really interesting research tool, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So let's make an assumption here, right? You come in and you're looking for a particular audience, and you've already the system. We'll talk a little bit about this, but the system can say, look, either you're starting with an existing plan that you don't want to change, you just want to add to, maybe you've got some deals already in place, or maybe you start with nothing. But you start with a plan, and it says, okay, we're going to go using that plan, find people who meet your audience criteria without loss of generality. Let's just say, again, millennial males, but it could be anybody. It could be anybody defined, via MRI or however you want to think about these things. Let's go find those people that you haven't reached yet. We use the Nielsen Fusion panel to do this with combined TV and digital data. And then we say, okay, now among those people you haven't reached yet, so this isn't just all of millennial males. We're actually going to say, among the people who have not yet been reached by your media plan or aren't part of your media plan, or we don't predict are going to see your media plan, where are they? And what are the options for reaching them? How many of them do you get with each buy? And what does it cost you? So what we do is we generate a list of what we call OTCPMs. So what on-target CPMs, meaning what am I paying per 1,000 impressions against people I actually want to reach, as opposed to just overall impressions. And so the algorithm generates a list of TV opportunities in programmatic TV. That's what the PTV is there for. In programmatic television, it generates a list of websites and placements that we can where people can be reached, and it generates a list of mobile websites and apps that where you can reach people. And it says it generates two figures for each one. It says here's how many people you would get with each one, and here's what it would cost in terms of CPM for reaching that key audience. And so this is, say, that list, right? So you can see in here there's some things that are television, there are some things that are web-based, like IMDb, there's a weather app, and it says, here's what it's going to cost you. And it says, you know what, the cheapest way to get a large chunk of additional incremental people who you haven't reached yet, in this case, is HGTV, right? And so it says, we're going to pull that out and we're going to put that into the plan. We're going to say everything you're going to do everything you said you were going to do in step 1, and we're going to add HGTV. And that's going to give you a bunch of incremental folks, and we're going to slide that in, and now we're going to call that, oops, there it is, part of the base plan. So you're starting with a plan, you're saying, who have I not reached? What's the cheapest way to reach more of those folks? Okay, I'm going to pick one, which is the cheapest, highest reach opportunity. I'm going to slide that into my plan, and now I'm going to repeat. So I'm going to repeat this over and over, and every time I do it, I'm going to actually change who I'm trying to reach, because I'm going to say, look, I've already reached people with IMDb now. I've already reached people with home and garden television. I don't want to reach them again necessarily. I'm just going to keep iterating and looking for ways to find incremental reach at the lowest possible cost, given the budget that I've got. And you can see pretty rapidly why, in order to do this, you need a fairly complex algorithm that can run against this. The fusion panel is enormous. The data that you're pulling in terms of pricing is enormous. And then the recalculations off the audiences are pretty enormous. And so that's what we built. And I want to linger on that because it's a product, but what that allows us to do is go back and answer this question that we posed at the beginning of this presentation, which is, what does an algorithm like that one potentially do for you in terms of cross-screen planning? And I think that as we entered into this investigation, we had some really interesting open questions. We said, look, maybe it is, maybe it's the case that, this is actually pretty incremental, pretty small change versus what you might be able to do with a spreadsheet. Maybe we're overestimating this, or maybe it's important for some audiences, but it's not so important for other audiences. And that's really where we began this thinking. So we ended up with this methodology that we started with. And again, I want to go back to the first thing I said, which is that this is all about the beginning of a piece of research. So we took one angle on this question. I think, as I said, there's going to be a number of angles that people are going to take to try and answer this question and get a deeper understanding of what this all means. But we took we compared two scenarios. One is, in both cases, we said, look, we'll give everybody $10 million, right? Nice big number, big enough to sort of let the algorithm do its thing. And then we imagined two scenarios. One is, two scenarios. One is, we said, look, let's imagine a company that plans in silos, meaning they plan their TV separately from their digital, separately from their mobile. And we looked at the eMarketer sort of average budget distribution across those channels, and we said, let's assume that they're making an average choice. And I think, again, as we think about variables that you can start to alter, this is something we're going to continue to investigate. But let's say they make an average choice in how they allocate their TV, digital, and mobile. And then let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say, look, within each channel, let's let the software do the planning, do its optimal planning within each channel and see what we get. In that case, what we're saying is, we're going to actually assume that, they've made a reasonable, they're planning in silos and they've made a kind of a reasonable budget decision, but we're not going to burden them with, not being able to do planning within a particular screen. Well, we're going to say they're going to do at least as well as the algorithm would do. And one last thing, we didn't do what we call a base plan, meaning we didn't want to sort of taint or skew this conversation by, assuming that people had already bought a bunch of American Idol or college football or whatever, which is absolutely the case that most people do that. But it added complexity and we removed it. So we said, look, just 10 million from scratch against the audience in question. And we ran this, as you'll see, for a number of different audiences. So we compared that, what I call a siloed plan, to an algorithmic cross-screen plan, meaning we took that $10 million, we let the software plan across the channels, and as it did in that process, we let it determine the budget. Again, no base plan. So we ran these two things against each other, and we asked the question, what do you get for different audiences in these different scenarios? And short answer is a lot of difference. So you can see, and we'll go through these 6 audiences. These are the first 6 audiences we looked at. We'll go through these 6 audiences a little bit, relatively briefly, but in some depth as we go forward. In the dark green on the left, you can see what the algorithm would have gotten for $10 million, and you can see on the right what the silo plan would have gotten for $10 million in terms of reach. Now, another caveat here. We basically said, look, we're just going to assume that the goal here is incremental reach, and we're going to do that comparison. There are obviously potentially other goals, things like optimal frequency, or effective frequency, those kinds of things. Those can be important goals, but and those are things that, if we get to it in Q&A, we can talk about it. Those are definitely pieces that we want to look at going forward. But you can see, so we looked at men 18 to 34, you're looking across the bottom here, women 25 to 54, overall adults 18 to 34, and then we decided, and adults 18 to 49. So we looked at some big demographic groups. We also looked at some life stage pieces that were defined through MRI, so first-time home buyers, and people who intended to buy cars. And the goal here was to say, look, is this, how different is this group to group? And you can see, in the broad men 18 to 34 bucket, you get actually quite a large difference. But across all of them, even the first-time home buyers, who I think are you see the smallest difference, there is a huge reach opportunity that you are potentially missing by not using an algorithm to do this planning work. So maybe an easier way to look at this is to flip this around and say, look, for that $10 million, what did you get, or what were you paying per person you reached, right? And in the light blue, you can see what the siloed plan is. And then in the dark blue, you can see what the cross-screen plan would have got you. So in the most extreme case, with that men 18 to 34, you're paying $1.43 if you're planning in silos for every male 18 to 34 that you're reaching. If you let the algorithm do it, you're paying more like 50 cents. And again, it varies across these different areas. One of the things that I think, one of our hypotheses, one of the things that we're going to want to investigate is that, well, let me go to the next slide and I'll talk a little bit about this. Another way to look at this, take those two pricing differences and just create a percentage difference, right? So you can see per male 18 to 34 you reached, you're paying 185% more to reach that individual with a siloed plan versus an algorithmic plan. And again, it goes down. So one thing you'll notice here is that the broad reach male 18 to 34 group was the most inefficient in terms of the difference. Whereas you get into something like people who intend to buy a car, and actually you're not losing nearly as much. by using a siloed plan versus versus an algorithmic plan. Now, there are a couple reasons that we hypothesize that this might be the case, and again, areas of further research. One is on the budget side, which is to say, the more that the particular audience consumes media in accordance, in a similar ratio to the way that you've budgeted, and we'll see this in just a second as we look at household income. The more that's true, the closer, the more people tend to watch 88% television and 7% video on their laptop and 5% on mobile. The closer you're going to get to, erasing the impact of letting the algorithm pick the budget versus picking it yourself, because that group's just going to consume media broadly in the ratios that you're looking at anyway. And then I think, the other thing is, especially for men 18 to 34, there are lots and lots of high concentration opportunities with huge amounts of overlap, especially web to TV to mobile. So it's very easy. Again, this is a hypothesis we're working on testing, but I think it's very easy to look at men 18 to 34 and say, look, I've got a bunch of shows that these guys watch, and I'm going to buy all of them. And if I'm not careful, I can go online and buy a bunch of websites they all visit and a bunch of apps they all use. And it turns out the same people who watch the TV shows also go to the websites, also use the apps. So you can get a lot of high frequency without a lot of incremental reach in those groups. And plus, there's an issue of cost. There's some of these groups have sites that programs that they watch and sites they visit that are high cost and high concentration, and the algorithm is better at finding lower concentration but lower cost opportunities that might be more efficient. So we took a different look at this. Sorry, this graph's a little bit on its side, but another way to look at this is sort of the inverted version of what we just saw. But we looked in this case at household income, and this is from our website. This is something we did after we did the white paper. So if you want the raw story on this actually comes off of our website under the research section if you're looking for it. And we looked at this and we said, what do you, sort of the opposite of what I just showed you, the inverted version of what I just showed you, what's the cost savings by using the algorithm versus a siloed plan? So for household income between 0 and 49K, you're saving about 30% per person reached by using the algorithm, whereas when you get to 150 plus in terms of household income, you're saving more like 50% per person reached. So this told us two things. First of all, just going back to the prior slide, we didn't somehow miraculously pick six segments that were particularly affected by this phenomenon or particularly affected by algorithmic cross-screen planning. We actually picked six that that were fairly representative, because when we went and looked at a different way of thinking about this around household income, we got fairly similar results. But what it also told us is that, again, there are areas where siloed plans don't make that much of a difference, whereas there are other areas where algorithms make a big difference. So in this case, lower income individuals, that siloed plan is actually fairly effective, whereas for high income individuals, it becomes less and less effective. And you can see this here. I mean, we looked at, what does this mean in terms of how you see this reflected on how people plan across screens, right? If you let the algorithm do its work for the incomes below 50K on the left, you see that most of that is in TV. We use programmatic TV, linear programmatic TV, but most of that is in TV. Some of it is in desktop, and a lot of it's in mobile. And if you look at that on the left, you think, well, that distribution of budget is actually fairly reflective of what we started with when we did the sort of average e-marketer budget. Whereas you look on the right for income above 200K, you let the algorithm run, and it's spending a lot of its time delivering mobile and desktop video, and less of its time delivering on TV. And so, of course, that's part of what's driving a lot of the relative efficacy between the two. So it's these people, the more that groups tend to be different than your broad average in terms of their media consumption, the more the algorithm is effective at finding incremental reach cheaply. And so, just to be respectful of time, I'm going to do. I'll talk briefly about where we are with this and what this means and what I think happens next. So what this means to me, I love research like this because I came in and I don't think I anticipated results of this magnitude, and so we spent a lot of time vetting it and making sure that we're on the right path. And it's really impressive to me the extent to which an algorithm can do good work in terms of improving your efficient reach. So that, for me, this said to me, this is an area of investigation that's worthy of continued thought. What it also leads to is a huge number of questions. So, and ones that we're working on answering right now. So one thing we talked about is, what is the driver of these different impacts among audiences? Is it consumption? Is it having a lot of sites that people overlap highly with? What is that? And then what's the relative, another question we're investigating is what's the relative impact of getting the budget right versus picking the site level information right? And as you can see, the budget has a fairly large impact. Like getting the right budget for the right audience is huge. You do have to generally find that you're going to plan that from the bottom up. That's where you get that to be particularly effective. We also see that, though, just anecdotally in the work that we've done so far, that's not published, we see some really interesting site level behaviors, as I mentioned, with the males 18 to 34, where if you get a lot of sites where people are overlapping highly, picking the right sites becomes incredibly valuable. And again, we looked at one goal here today. There are a lot of potential goals. There's efficacy, impact. There are a bunch of other things that you can concern yourself with. The one thing I will say on frequency is that again, the early indications are if you aim for a frequency of 1 across, that you're trying to optimize for maximum number of people reached at least once, you actually get a fairly good frequency curve that's fairly flat, and I don't think you're that far off of optimizing, say, for your frequency of 3 or 5. But again, it's something we're gonna investigate more clearly going forward. And then finally, I think that one of the things that's on everybody's mind and something that we're looking at is what's the relative value of these screens. So this work assumes that a TV ad is basically worth a mobile ad. How often is that true? How far off is one from the other? I think this is really valid and valuable because you certainly want to get that first impression, and that first impression has a lot of value regardless of the screen. But layering on potential different sort of layers of efficacy going forward is going to be an ongoing piece of research for us. So with that, I will toss to Zena and see if there are any questions that have come through on the chat. If there haven't, you want to put one through right now, that'd be great. And as Zena mentioned as well, we're on Twitter, so if there are other things that come up either later or after this conversation, or as you rewatch this as a recording, we're happy to have that conversation there as well.
Hi, Taylor. Thank you so much. Like Taylor mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and I'll read them out during this Q&A. Taylor, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Great. So first question, how different would this analysis be if you're aiming for an effective frequency of, say, 5?
So it's a really good question, and I alluded to that a little bit at the end there. I think it depends. It's a terrible answer, but it really depends on the audience you're looking at. So, for instance, you saw with the males 18 to 34 that just overall your reach is lower. You've got a fairly expensive set of folks you're trying to reach, and that's going to give you even your optimal reach curve as you try and get, your optimal frequency curve as you try and get, maximize your reach might be pretty steep in that case, because you're every time you're looking for how to put this. It depends on the reach curve that you're going to get as you optimize for reach of 1. In some cases, this algorithm is going to find a huge number of opportunities to reach people once, and they're going to be fairly independent. And so you're going to get a huge number of people where your frequency is 1. And that might not be the way you would want to do your work for if you wanted to optimize for a frequency of, say, 5. But in a lot of these cases, what you're getting is every time you make an incremental buy, it's not purely incremental. A lot of it is overlapping with existing folks. So as long as you've got a fairly low optimal frequency you're aiming for, let's say a 3 or a 5, or I guess if we're talking, I'm thinking there in that case of around a week. If you're thinking around a month, I think ComScore had something recently saying like keep it under 50. If you're in that range, you're probably okay, because every time you're making that incremental buy, you're getting incremental reach, but you're also getting incremental frequency against a group of people that, where you're getting a reasonable amount of frequency without going too far overboard.
Thank you. Next question. How does this change if you've already made a major investment in something like American Idol or college football?
Yeah, that was one thing that I mentioned earlier. I'm glad somebody picked up on that. So one of the interesting things here is, most people don't come to planning with a completely blank slate. They'll have these kinds of relationships. So one of the things that that you want to think about is, who have you already reached with these major relationships? Again, the preliminary work that we've done says the outcomes aren't the broad learning that say, you can spend your $10 million or your $5 million, your $1 million or your $100,000 more efficiently with an algorithm doesn't go away. This algorithm finds the incremental people you have not already reached, and it's still effective if you just change if you've already reached a bunch of them through a major relationship. That said, it can change the efficiency that you gain. So, for instance, with the males 18 to 34, if you've got a sporting relationship and you reach a huge number of them through, say, college basketball, then you've got a qualitatively different audience you're trying to reach with the Crossscreen planner. That's, males 18 to 34 who you couldn't reach through, say, a college basketball relationship. And those guys might be quite different. You might get a less efficient or less of efficiency gain by using an algorithm, but it's still there in the cases that we've seen so far.
Question. Does this work assume that all ads have the same impact regardless of screen?
Oh, sorry. I hope I'm back on. Yes, it does. And again, as you look through the research here, there were some simplifying assumptions that just sort of were meant to get us started as we think about how to use algorithms across screens. But I don't think it's a terrible assumption, but it is something that we want to investigate further as we go forward.
How does media cost factor into this?
Sure, it's a good question. So, you could fairly easily build an algorithm, say that, just looks for the next best place to find more people that you're looking for. But oftentimes you'll find that those are some of the more expensive placements and programs and apps that you might want to be on. So what this does is it says, what's the most cost-efficient way for me to reach these incremental people? So what's the cheapest cost per new reached person? And then I'm going to add that in, and I'm going to keep doing that iteratively. If you're a real comp sci geek, there are actually ways you might even make that slightly more efficient. And if you want to have that conversation with our engineers, I'm happy to have it. I've had it. It's fascinating. It is sort of beyond the scope of a lunchtime webinar, though, I think.
Was there a multicultural component to the study?
There wasn't, not in the slides I've got, but if you actually go to TubeMogul.com/research, we've looked at, I believe it's up there. I'll have to actually double check. So we did look at one point at people who consumed bilingual news consumers, for instance. looking at, is that a particularly strong place to use an algorithm? I don't want to say off the top of my head what the results were because I don't have them off the top of my head, but it's definitely worth looking. Again, TubeMogul.com/research, and you can search for cross-screen planning. What I will say is that, as we continue to do this, one thing that we can do in this research is look at pretty much any audience defined by responses to MRI questions. So there's a lot of different nuances that we can bring to bear in this.
And my last question, so if anybody has any more, this is your last chance to put them in. What is the relative impact of picking the right budget versus picking the right sites and shows for a given budget?
It's a really interesting question, right? I mean, because at some level that question is saying, like, how much is media mix planning influencing this, and how much is algorithmic cross-screen planning influencing this? And this system does this, works from the bottom up, so it does both at the same time. So it's a little bit hard to tease apart. And it also sort of begs the question, what's the alternative? What is the other budget you might go with? Again, this is something we're looking into and we're working on. What I will say is that, in the cases where there's a huge amount of difference, a lot of it can be explained by the budget. So in that male 18 to 34 example I keep going to, if you're not, those guys are on their computers, they're on their consoles, they're on their mobile devices. And if you're spending all your time on TV, you're just going to have a hard time getting to them, period. But then there's sort of an asymptotic outcome there where you can get to the point where your budget is right, and then you start to end up in more in the cases where you saw with the auto intenders or with the even better example, the household incomes under $50,000, where those budgets are pretty much on target for what you would expect for those audiences. So the siloed and the algorithmic plans basically look the same in terms of budget, but you were still seeing something like a 30 to 40% increase in efficiency using the algorithm. So that's broadly speaking the way that I think about it. Again, I'm looking forward to gathering a deeper, broader set of data and bringing that out publicly as well.
That's all I've got for questions. Taylor, is there anything that you want to close off with before I say adieu?
No, other than to say, on this last slide, all this stuff is available on TubeMogul.com/research. The Crossscreen white paper is available there. I will be on Twitter after this. I'm at TAS2, or you can tweet at TubeMogul as well. And happy now or later or in the future, or if you're listening to this as a recording, to answer any questions that you might have. And I want to finally, I want to thank the ARF and Zia for making this possible. It was a pleasure, and it was really a pleasure to have everybody join me over their lunch hour today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you and TubeMogul for dedicating this time to present your study with us. I know that we'll continue to work together as TubeMogul is slated to attend or present other events with the ARF. I'll keep everybody posted on what those are. And thank you everybody else for spending their lunch hour with us. Hope to see you for the next webcast. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.